Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to the Wisdom of Charlene Li. You know, we live in an increasingly complex world, increasingly technology-driven, and things change so rapidly. Sometimes people find it hard to find their feet. And in a world full of tips, tricks, hacks, and tactics, people are actually looking for a deeper level of wisdom. In fact, people need to know that there's a renaissance of thinking happening, that great leaders are actually doing some wise thinking, not just smart thinking, but wise thinking. And so in the show, we're meeting with these purveyors of wisdom, these people that have a domain of expertise that they've taken to a much, much deeper level of thinking. And so today, I want to welcome Charlene Li to the Wisdom of. And the goal of the show is to explore how these wisdom-driven leaders unpack these complex issues and circumstances and projects that people might be dealing with through the lens of their particular wisdom. So, Charlene, welcome. It's such a joy to have you here. And I know that what you're going to share with us is super interesting because I'm already super interested in it. So from a purely selfish standpoint, I'm at least going to get some great insights out of this. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Simon.
It's a pleasure. And I do want to refer to some notes while I let you know about Charlene. She's for the past 2 decades, she's been helping people see the future. And a lot of this is through the field of digital transformation that so many people are familiar with. It is a part of the lexicon of business language these days. She works in the field of leadership, customer experience, and also the future of work, you know, how people engage and are employed by organizations. She's the author of 6 books, New York Times bestseller, Open Leadership, and co-author of the critically acclaimed Groundswell. And then the latest book is The Disruption Mindset, which leans in on something that I know we're going to enjoy speaking about. She's the founder and senior fellow at Altimeter, a disruptive analyst firm, which was acquired in 2015 by Profit. And she's named one of the most creative business people by Fast Company, which is quite a mantle. You know, people, creative and business people don't always go together for people. And she's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School. So whilst we'll certainly be discussing digital transformation, Charlene, because it's almost a norm these days. I know that disruption is such a dynamic force. In business and in the world, and it's a force in play for leaders all over the world, and perhaps that leaders might ignore at their own peril, or even at the peril of their own company. And in fact, you see disruption perhaps a little bit differently to a lot of people. And I'm sure we'll talk about digital transformation as a byproduct of talking about disruption, but I'd love you to maybe get us started and lean in a little bit. I watched one of your videos, you talked about that gulp moment. I loved that. So I wonder if you could lean in and just get us started on this whole kind of thought process around disruption.
Sure. I think of disruption. I wrote a book called The Disruption Mindset. And when you look at disruption as an opportunity for change and growth and transformation, rather than something to be avoiding, then you look at the world from a very different perspective. You run towards disruption because even though it's going to be hard, you've taken the steps to be prepared for that journey, to be resilient. You and your organization run towards disruption because you know everybody else is hiding from it. So you disrupt yourself, you disrupt the industry, and you do it on behalf of your customers, the people you are serving, your clients, your constituents. And you do it because you're so driven by what you see as a potential for them to just do well, be well. You want to serve them. So you are driven to embrace this disruption. It's a very different mindset.
Well, it's a very different mindset. And, you know, as I listen to you speak about that, all of a sudden in my mind, I start thinking of it as a muscle that needs to be developed. But I think one of the, you know, if we're in this space of what is the wisdom behind this kind of domain of expertise, the statement you made about pursue disruption in the support of your constituents, you know, in defense of and service of your customers. That, do you have an example of a company or an example of something that happened that where people pursued that disruption really in support of those constituents, and strategically it led to a much greater level of success for them?
Yeah, but one of my favorite examples is Adobe. Again, an old line technology company, and they made these amazing CD-ROM based products for marketers and
Yeah,
creatives. And they were just incredibly successful. People were very happy with them. There was nothing challenging them in the marketplace. They had like 95% market share. It's just nobody was leaving. And yet they said, there is this customer that's in the cloud who would really benefit from a lower price point than thousands of dollars. They could pay as little as $10 a month to use some of our products, like just use a version of Photoshop, for example. And they also realized that the cloud was coming, in that they could move from 18 to 24 month cycles for product development to instantaneously, because you could push the latest updates out through the
yeah,
cloud.
of course.
No, this is 2010. Nobody was moving to the cloud at that point. It was untested territory. And their customers were 100% happy with them. Their employees were used to doing things in a certain way. And if you went to a cloud, it was going to be highly disruptive. And as a publicly traded company, when they looked at the financials of doing this, they knew they would lose money for 8 straight quarters.
Wow.
A publicly traded company, right?
Yeah.
And if your stock price goes down too far, you're a takeover target. So they looked at all those things and said, look at these customers. They could benefit so much from our product, but they don't really exist. They don't even know that this is a possibility.
Yeah.
So they did this research, they did this survey, they did a test actually in Australia, and they found that, yeah, there was a tremendous appetite for it. So they
Yes.
launched it. And the customers rebelled. 50,000 of them signed a petition saying, we want to go back. The employees, I would get phone calls for them during this time period, and they were like, you would not believe what's happening at Adobe. It's crazy. If we pull this off, it would be amazing, but it's crazy and insane right now. And the stock market was like, what are you guys doing? So when they launched the first quarter, they launched it a year, and then they finally pulled the strings on this completely a year after they launched it. And you could see their profits just plummeting in that first quarter. And when they performed the results, they said, we are so excited about our results. It's such a great pilot that we've had. The launch has gone fantastic. Look, the number of customers, and we've lost exactly the amount of money we predicted. Isn't this wonderful? And the stock price took off because they had prepared everybody for this change. And so even though they lost money, they were able to communicate, this is who our new customer is, and this is how we want to go out doing it. I admire the wisdom of that leadership team to believe and see the patterns, I think, that people couldn't see, to identify that these are the actions, and to make really great decisions along the way. To just beautifully, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was beautifully executed from step to step. And one of the biggest ones is they made that big gulp decision. They
Yes.
took that big gulp. They literally looked around each other in the room like, are we going to do this? And they all nodded, yes, we're going to do this. We are prepared. It's going to be hard, but we have done everything we can to know that regardless of whatever the outcome is, we're going to be okay. And that
What a
gives them
bold
confidence.
statement. We've lost a lot of money, but it was exactly the amount we said we'd lose. And so we're good. That is
and
not
Wall
a
Street wants you to meet expectations. So they set the expectations that they were going to bring on so many people and lose so much money. And that's exactly what they did.
Yes.
So the stock price took off.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that discussion about patterns and really wisdom in a minute, particularly in the midst of disruption. But, there are a lot of examples of companies that went through periods of disruption, either deliberately or it happened to them, and then came out of it, and they're still around today. And a lot of this happened around 2010, and I'm starting to wonder what was going on in 2010. There was, and that, you pointed out, I can remember that was when IT companies IT departments in companies were saying, we will never go to the cloud. It's not secure enough. Is that the period about which we started to tip with people like Adobe and others leading us towards the cloud? Was it around that period?
Well, it started in 2007, 2008 when the financial crisis hit, and people realized I need a more robust strategy.
Mm,
Our business is fine, but it's not robust and resilient. And that was one of the things that Adobe was looking at was recurring payments from a wider base of customers to shore up their financials. So they accomplished that, which is why their stock price took off so much. But the cloud and technology allowed two things. First of all, cloud just allowed for development of technology to happen so much faster
yeah.
in a distributed way. You didn't need heavy legacy enterprise products in place. The marketing department could go out and get the tools that they needed on the cloud. They didn't have to go through IT.
Mm,
So marketing was one of the areas that had a tremendous amount of digital transformation because they had all these tools now readily available that was
yeah.
not dependent on IT to install it.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other cool thing that happened is that the internal technologies, the internal collaboration tools, in the past, we had SharePoint. That was about it.
Mm,
And it was static files. We saw the rise of Slack, of Teams, of Twitter, all these tools that allow people to just communicate a lot better and faster. And so disruption couldn't happen. Transformations were very hard inside organizations because the information had to flow down from the top, data would flow up from the bottom, and it get filtered and distilled in so many different ways. Versus now, CEOs can talk directly to the front lines. They can listen to what's happening on the front lines.
mm,
There's more lubricant to go across the entire organization for cross-departmental communications. So we're just being more connected externally to each other, but also internally inside of organizations
mm.
that allow transformations to happen much faster and more cohesively.
Yeah. I'm often um, telling people that possibly the two most important systems in business are actually the system for thinking and the system for influence, which people don't often see as systems. So, a business is as good as the quality of thinking that's driving it. And then the ability to get people to make choices in your favor, staff, suppliers, regulators, customers. And what sits underneath influence, of course, is the power of communication. And so if technology elevates communication in every direction in a powerful way, you can see the change that would make. I'd love to go back to this idea of patterns. And we use visual models to communicate. We use visual models to help people influence. And there's a model that I've been teaching for years that I call the futures model. And we use it as a sales tool, we use it as an explanation tool. But the futures model says, whilst people say you can't predict the future, we actually can. There are two possible futures ahead of us. There's a future where we win, we ride this green curve upwards and we win, and time compounds the results because time compounds everything. Or we ride this red curve down to where we lose. You made a really interesting comment about disruption. I'd never thought about this before. If this is the simple passing of time, a lot of businesses are making their decisions around disruption in a downward direction because they're really responding to external forces, which might be regulators, the market shifted on them or whatever. And you made this statement that you should pursue disruption for in the service of your constituents, basically, which is an internal conscious decision you've made. And if we thought about disruption can affect you in both directions, quite frankly, and maybe a part of the wisdom of decision making around this is which path do you choose, right? And what's the driving force in that path? So this is kind of a clumsy summary of what you were saying, but I'd love you to lean in on this area of wisdom around it, because what are the patterns that you can spot that will put you on this exponential curve versus the drift patterns that are probably happening because drift always heads downwards. I'd love to lean in on this idea of wisdom and disruption and the patterns and everything else.
Sure. I mean, people feel disrupted when they're pulled from the place of comfort of status quo of where they were, and they don't know where they have ended up. So they feel disrupted in that way.
Hmm.
And the reason I was so curious by why is it that some organizations just seem to disrupt themselves over and over again, and they seem to do it without any problems. And the thing is, they're able to sit in that liminal space, in this
Yeah.
messy middle, because they know where they're headed. They haven't arrived there, and it's still really messy, but they're confident
Mm,
because they know why they're going on this journey. They know the reason that they're doing this. It's for their customers,
mm,
and they have a very clear idea of who their future customer is.
yes.
And it was the thing that, again, when I started writing the book, unlike most of my books, I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know what was it a lot that allowed leaders and their organizations to continually disrupt. And what you find is that when they're in that messy middle, they find places to rest and recover. Like any athlete, you're going to stretch and then you need recovery time. They build in recovery time to create a new normal. So they go back to a point of knowing, and then they extend themselves again and then revert. And their cycles are very, very fast. And they
Yeah.
do this every day. So I as a leader, I long time ago, I ran into a woman. I was at an event. She was this, one of the admin people. And she had a tattoo on her arm that said adventure. And I asked her, why do you have that on your tattoo? Because I love asking people about their tattoos. So it's very personal. And she goes, I've been traveling the world for 2 years, and I finally had to come home. And I got that tattoo to remind me that I can have an adventure anywhere, just with myself. I could have an adventure just sitting in this room by myself. And so when COVID hit, and that was the biggest disruption that all of us
Mm,
experienced,
mm,
we found two groups of people. One group that said, I'm going to go hide. I'm going to try to hold on to the normal that I used to have and try to be as normal as possible. And I'm just going to wait for this thing to blow over me. So
yes.
they sheltered, hid, and others said, oh my goodness, there are all these needs out there. I don't have my own life. I don't have my own business, but there are these new needs that are being created by this disruption. And I need to serve them. I see an opportunity to serve them. So
Yes.
restaurants, some closed, others transformed it to delivery only, changed their entire menu, figured out a completely different way to serve their customers, and they thrived.
Yes.
So I see disruption as a choice. You can
Yeah.
either hide from it, you can ignore it because you don't know what to do with it, and the future is very scary. And having to try to predict the future is something we don't like to do because what if we're wrong? And I think wisdom comes from knowing that, yeah, I could be wrong, but given all the information that I have today, I'm going to do the best that I can to make the decision that has to be made today. I so respect people who said, yeah, I made a choice. I made the best choice that I could. It was the wrong thing. And now we're going to head in a different direction. And we learned a lot. Failure to them is not this emotional roller coaster of shame and regret.
Yes.
It is instead a learning opportunity because you now have more data of what didn't work. And you're so much further than you were when you were before.
Uh,
So the wisdom to look at that situation from a different perspective is extremely important for disruption.
well, time and the future fascinates me. And if we think about the future, people do get into this thinking that we're either going to be successful or we're going to fail. And it's never binary. So seldom do you fail completely because there's an entire range between those two. So you might get to here instead of to here, but that is still a green line. It's just not as steep, right? When COVID happened, I pushed a version of this my futures model out, and I said, COVID's hit, and at some point we will cross the line. And what does that mean? At some point, we will come out of the pandemic. Now, we don't know when that is, but we will come out of the pandemic. And at that point, there'll be two groups of people. Like you said, there'll be the people that found themselves on the red line and may drop away. And then there'll be people that somehow figured out how to make foundational decisions in the midst of COVID that gave them the opportunity that was almost certainly going to accelerate away after that. And what is that line? Well, it could be as simple as when human desire for greed and business success or whatever outstrips fear, we might cross that cross that line again. But you've spoken a lot about decision making. People can't predict the future, but I think if I listen to what you're saying, people who have this disruptive muscle don't view the future the same as everybody else. Don't view success and failure the same as everybody else. They see the lessons from this part that we didn't quite get right, but we did get a bunch of stuff right. And I'd love to have you, decision making is often seen as a process or a well, we've had them before, right? The decision-making process. There's many of them that have been published, and the scientific method and everything else. I'd love to kind of draw some parallels between, decision-making in a digitally transforming and disruptive world versus wisdom in a digitally transforming and disruptive world. What are some of the comparisons and differences that you might see between those two things?
Yeah, I define wisdom as being able to make great decisions consistently.
Yeah.
And in particular, you can be a wise person, fall out of wisdom, and make foolish decisions. So how do we keep ourselves from doing that? And I think wisdom is a practice, in the same way that disruption is a practice, that you have to practice it every single day. And so I'm marrying the work of wisdom and the philosophical, spiritual space that has always been in, and the decision-making science, the
Yes.
cold hard science in business, and marrying the two to say, how do we make better decisions with wisdom? Take into account we have science behind it, rules and regulations, but also there's something philosophical about being able to be wise. And the reason I'm so curious about this question is oftentimes we think of wisdom as something we acquire over time and
Yeah.
experience. I'm like, do I have to be old to be wise? Is that a requirement?
Yeah.
Because we all have met people who are very young, early in their lives, early in their careers. And you come away from them like, wow, that is a wise soul. That is a wise person.
Mm.
What is it that makes them wise? And how do we hack that? How do we get wiser, faster, sooner, and more consistently build wisdom into our organizations? So it's something that we develop in our leaders and ourselves.
Mm.
And so I think about technology as a way to help us get more experience, to see more information, to see the experiences that other people have. Because you can get experience from your own experience. I'm sorry, wisdom from your own experience, but you can also learn from other people making the same mistakes and communicating that and sharing that.
Mm.
The experience of going through wisdom through other people is an incredibly valuable space to be into as well. So that's just one of the things. And then also, to practice making good decisions, one of the key areas of wisdom is seeing, hearing, listening. I love the Stoic Epictetus. He wrote 2,000 years ago that you were born with 2 ears and one mouth, use them in the same proportion.
Yep.
So we should be listening twice as much as we talk. And yet we value leaders who seem to do really good talking, expressing themselves strong and projected out there. Whereas, how do we choose wise leaders who are very good listeners, can be attuned, and also can remove their own prejudice, remove their own biases, how they see the world, to be able to see the world from other people's perspectives.
Yes.
And again, technology can help you do that by giving you so many different perspectives that you can see and filter and understand in ways that you have never seen before.
Yeah. I talk a lot about and do a lot of work in the realms of stewardship, which is a very simple concept of take what's been given to you and return it with increase. Make it better. You don't own it, you're caretaking. And I think one of the things, from that wise stewardship kind of perspective is that, wise people always hold on to context. And, smart people can sometimes lose context and get into the conceptual solutions. But, for me, wisdom is always anchored to the context of the Adobe story, right? What's the context? Let's make a much better solution for our customer. It provides that lighthouse to move, that beacon, sorry, that you're talking about. So as long as there's a theory around change management, bridges transition theory, right? The present doesn't hurt you, and neither does the future once you're living there. It's the transition, the bit in the middle, the messy middle, and you've got to cross that line. And so the wise people that I've met always have context clear in their head. They understand why any of this matters, and they're willing to put aside their own personal needs, which is a stewardship principle, to make sure that we get to the context, which is interesting. You spoke about, you can see, you meet young people and you'll say, oh, there's a wise head on those young shoulders. And sometimes there's a lot written and spoken about our young adults who are the leaders coming through, and not always favorably. But we, as older people and as a baby boomer, we do that again at our own peril, because they are going to be the leaders. And so it'd be better for us to nurture and figure out, maybe they know some stuff we don't know. So do you have any kind of thoughts around, digital transformation would be a different experience for young employees compared to an older set? Disruption would be different, I suspect, for younger employees. I know you work also in that space of how people, take on these changes. Have you kind of seen any patterns, noticed anything age based or different?
Yes, I did a survey of disruptive leaders. And what was interesting, there was no difference in age, no difference in level and how disruptive people are, what they think they're content. Again, this is across all age groups. Across geographies, you see some difference because of various cultural issues. We did see a difference, especially in the US, of how women perceive themselves as disruptive versus men. They saw themselves as less disruptive, even though they had the same levels of leadership qualities that make a disruptive leader, again, because of the negative permutations of being disruptive and being a female in the workplace. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So you're really stuck. And so the thing, though, that about young people in particular that's different, they do not differ in their ambitions. They do not differ in the way they think about the world. They differ in the way they communicate.
Right.
And they communicate differently from generation to generation. And there's almost exactly a 20-year gap between the ways that new technologies come along that people are comfortable with. And so when you think about communications, you talked earlier about that is how influence happens. It's how relationships are formed. And when I think about the future of work, I'm constantly asked, what does the future of work look like? And go, I can tell you exactly what your future of work looks like. And you can decide what it's going to look like today simply by answering this question. What kind of relationship do you want to see with your employees? What kind of relationship do they want with you? If you can define what kind of relationship you each want, you can define the future of work. We do not think about work from a point of relationship. And that is a failure, again, of leadership, because leadership is simply a relationship between people who aspire to create change and the people they inspire to follow them. That is the simple definition of leadership. It has nothing to do with your title, where you are in the organization, because you could be in charge of somebody and they won't follow you because you do not have the credibility to inspire them to follow you. So I look at this age gulp difference is that ability to communicate and develop relationships on the terms that each of the parties need to have. So when you can have the wisdom to bridge that gulf, to step out of the way that you are comfortable communicating, the way that you are leading, and to form a true relationship with your employees. It could look like anything, but define it. Define what that relationship will look like
I love
from
that.
your side and from their side.
I love that. What's the world of work going to look like in our company? And people slip into, what sort of tech are we going to have? What will the structure of the organization be? What will the reporting lines be? What are the job descriptions going to be? None of which is really about relationships. I love that. You must have had some pretty interesting conversations with business leaders around change management, when you were engaged on a digital transformation project, for example, and then you're bringing this body of thinking. How about we define the relationships you want to have, in this business, including post the digital transformation, if there's ever a post, if there's ever an end to it. If you're an older leader, let's just take the lesson out of that. If you're an older leader in business or in any organization, you would do well to just learn to communicate in the way that your younger and rising stars are communicating, which is a learnable skill, right? You can learn to communicate the way they communicate. You don't have to adopt all of their value systems and everything else, but you can learn to communicate in the way that they do. And it just, you must have had some fascinating conversations as you lean in on the early stages of a digital transformation project.
Yes.
What
I say it's never about the technology. The
no.
one thing I've learned about digital transformation, it's never about the technology.
Wow.
It's not
Okay.
about the digital. It is about the transformation. It's the people side.
Yeah.
And we keep losing sight of that. And so, I have leaders, I've done endless amounts of workshops with leaders and like, I don't know how to use this technology, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, forget about the technology. What would you say to people if you could? If you had an employee, 2 employees, 3 employees from the front line sitting here next to you, what would you say to them? They go, I know exactly what I would say to them. I go, then just say it. Like literally say it to me right now. And I go, do you mind if I record it? I'm like, sure. Okay, they record it. And I'm like, here you go. Here's your recording. Give it to your PR people, give it to your internal comms people, turn that into blog posts, into Slack posts, whatever you want, communicate that.
Yeah. What's stopping? The magical part of your question is the bit about if you could. And so what do you think's getting in the way when someone says, well, I'm not sure how that, and
We've
as soon as
been
you release them with if you could, they go, I'd say exactly this. What is it that's stopping them from doing that?
we've been trained that communications are scarce and expensive and dangerous. So
Right.
whenever you communicate, it has to be perfect. It has to be scripted. You have to know exactly that you say this and this is going to be the outcome because we cannot entertain the fact that it could potentially not work, that we
Mm,
might be misunderstood. So you boil everything down to blandness. There's no storytelling. There's no sense of you because we take all of you out of it because it shouldn't be personal,
mm.
but it's always personal.
Yeah.
You're connecting with these frontline people. They're thrilled that they're hearing from you. There is a relationship going on there. There is a power distance. And when you show up authentically as a person, you're closing that power distance. You're seeing them as people, they're seeing you as people, and a relationship is born.
Yes.
That is incredibly powerful because what you should be communicating is this is where our future is. These are the future customers we want to serve. This is the strategy we want to take. And this is how you are contributing to that success of that strategy. Those 3 questions are what I ask organizations. Can your employees answer those 3 questions? What are your future customers' needs? What's our strategy to get there? And can every single employee explain how they are adding to the successful execution of that strategy?
Mm.
If they can't, then you've got work to do as a leader.
Yeah. And I think, when I think about large scale change projects that I've been a consultant on, those 3 questions would have set them off in a much better direction. And in fact, what we often see is the leaders are using the strategy to figure out what they're going to do, as opposed to here's where we're trying to get to for the customer, and here's how we're going to do it in broad terms, and there'll be some mess in the middle, but also here's how everyone gets to contribute or how everyone's going to play a role. I think I was going to ask you what are some of the lessons for leaders, but if people just write those 3 questions down and almost have them in their pocket, because I think they're 3 great questions, not just for digital transformation, but anytime you're asking people to do some things, right? It's because fundamentally in this increasingly digital world, humans are analog still. We have grayscale, we have ranges of emotion and behavior and everything else. And so, hearing, someone who has expertise in digital transformation anchors so much of this on the relationships, the people, that saying, it's not personal, it's just business, couldn't be more wrong, because business is always personal, it's at some level. So if I limited you to one big insight, you love the leaders of the world, not just business leaders, but you love the leaders of the world because that comes from your experience in digital disruption, and digital transformation and helping the world of work and helping people. If there was one big message you could share with the leaders of the world, what might that be?
I have made my personal purpose to catalyze transformation, to maximize human potential. And I think the message I would say is look at all this potential.
Mm.
And you could be the unlock for all of that potential. How will you do that? You're unlocking human potential in the workplace. You're unlocking and giving everybody the opportunity to contribute fully. And so, how will you unlock that? And that is the hardest part of being a leader. And I love the example of Jeff Weiner. He was a former CEO of LinkedIn, and at every meeting he would introduce himself, internal, external. I saw him do this over and over again. And when you talk about the purpose of LinkedIn, and he talk about the mission and the values and the strategy, and people got really sick of it. And someone asked him, "When are you going to stop doing this?" And he said, "I will stop talking about all these really important things when people stop looking surprised." So we think we say it once and people, we know it. You have to say it over and over and over and
Yes.
over again. And the reason you do that is to make sure people understand why we are here, why we have agreed to spend our precious time and our precious lives on this endeavor, and how do we encourage people to bring all of themselves. And that requires that you be making the culture in the workplace that people can bring their whole selves, that they feel like they are included, that they belong, that they're safe.
Mm.
Because if you don't have that psychological safety, people will hold back.
Yep.
They won't contribute everything. They won't reach their full potential, and your organization will not reach its full potential.
Yeah. The example of, why is LinkedIn here and what are we doing at the start of every meeting is the classic contextual wisdom that I'm talking about. Start every meeting with context, right? And imagine a world where the leaders in an organization start every meeting by reminding everybody why we exist as an organization, and then lent into, because I loved what you said about unlocking, lent into what potential are we going to unlock in this meeting? And if we don't have a line of sight on that, let's not have the meetings. It's if every leader saw themselves as being the unlock for potential, that's a paradigm shift that is worth people thinking about, in their role as leaders, rather than being the keeper of the resources, the distributor of resources, the purveyors of performance, discipline, and everything else. How are we going to carry ourselves say, as the C-suite, as the unlockers of potential? It's a wonderful perspective, and
Yeah,
it's
it's one of the
disturbing.
things I did in my company. I made the commitment that we would only have one weekly meeting across all departments. And then people would, do all the meetings, but we would have one meeting a week, and we'd start at the highest level. And we'd always begin with an open forum for people to share, how do the values of our company show up for you this week?
Mm.
How did they use them to help you make decisions? And again, a reminder after that of what we're trying to do and how everything that we did fed to our strategy. And then in our personal conversations, I would always encourage people, like, what is how do you want to develop? And made it very clear that this is a contract that we have right now. And that at some point, most likely you're going to go work someplace else.
Mm.
And so I'm very cognizant of that. And where do you want to go? Because if I have an understanding of what your ambitions are, how you want to unlock your potential, then I will, to the greatest extent possible, provide that for you in this workplace. But at some point, I may not be able to provide that for you.
Mm.
And for me to understand that and encourage and help you find that next opportunity, we'll do that 6 months before it's time for you to go. And in the meantime, you'll help me look for your replacement. That was a commitment that I made to every single person. And then I also had a rule that after 2 years, you had to go out and do informational interviews. You
Yes.
had to go out and just look for opportunities. You gotta, at 2 years, you're gonna have some itches that you want to scratch. So go scratch them. And inevitably they would come back and it's like, I looked around. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the introductions, even. I'm exactly where I need to be.
Yes.
And so the loyalty that I was able to engender, not because I was just giving them a lot of Kool-Aid to drink, but because I understood where they wanted to develop, gave them as many opportunities internally and externally to explore them, and really try to unlock that potential over and over again. And we grew like gangbusters.
And
So it's
well,
one of those
even
things that I see work.
yeah, well, even that, Charlene, is a disruptive, it's a disruptive human practice. It's so far out of the boundaries of a lot of people's thinking, which is how do we keep our best talent? How do we, talent retention? How do we hold them here as opposed to them making the choice to stay? Because they know that as a company, we're trying to grow them into the next person they're meant to be, not keep them at the level they're at and exploit their talent. I mean, there's so many things running through my head as you talk through that. What popped into my head was to not do that is almost exploitative. We need to hold you at this talent level because it works for us. And even that is a disruptive thought. I could explore your mind all day, and I'm mindful of the time you've already given us. There are so many takeaways, and I think about imagine a world where leaders are the unlockers of potential, and also disturbingly think about the world we're in and whether we're seeing that with leadership everywhere. Um, this idea of disruption and build the muscle for disruption, but have a a destination you're trying to get to, and ideally in service, be on that green line. Don't see disruption as something that's happening to you. Be a part of the cause of that. Recognize that it's about building relationships always. And so, every 20 years, this cycle will occur. You may as well figure out how communication works across those cycles so you can build the relationships. There's so many things that people could take out of this. And as I said, we could chat about this all day. But I'd love to finish off with a couple of kind of left field questions, just so people can get to know you a bit more, and then we'll wrap it up. Would that be okay?
Sure thing.
So if you could solve one problem or issue in the world, and you knew that you were going to have the solution for it, even if you don't know what it is right now, you knew you could solve it, what would be that thing that you'd want to solve for the world?
I would remove the shame of failure, fear of failure.
Oh,
If
wow.
we stopped,
Great answer.
if we could stop being afraid of failing, it would make such a difference in the world, because we would try so many more things, knowing that we were learning. And so I like to say, again, I try to disrupt myself, have an adventure every single day.
Yeah.
And I have guidelines. And as long as I stay inside of these guidelines, I will be safe. But I encourage people to define what those boundaries are and to live at the boundary, live there, and know that there are other people around you who will pick you up and support you when you stumble and fall, because
I
it's
love
hard.
it.
And it's also being comfortable in that space of change. We try to rush through change as quickly as possible because it's uncomfortable. And I'm like, get comfortable being uncomfortable. When your hands are a little sweaty and your stomach's a little churning, that is exactly where you want to be. Stretched, not stressed, but stretched. You want to live at that edge. So when you can live at that edge without fear of failure, that's a wonderful place to be.
It's interesting when you watch small children playing before they go to school. They have no fear of failure. Everything's on the table, right? Imagination reigns supreme and everything's on the table. And then we come out of formal education often with the fear of failure, and fail the exam or pass the exam and that sort of thing. I love that answer. One more quick question. As a leading thinker in the field of transformation and disruption, perhaps we should drop the word digital, but leader of the field of transformation and disruption, you're also obviously a student of history. And if you could go back to any point in time and just be able to be a fly on the wall and really watch and absorb and see the patterns that are occurring, what time and why would you go back there?
There are certain points in time, like right at the beginning of the industrial age in the late 1800s, or in the mid 1500s of the Renaissance. And the thing is, when people were in that time, they don't realize they were in this transformational time. They're just in it. Like things are changing all around them, but they have no idea how incredible it is. And so I would go back into that time and study how the leaders functioned to be able to lead themselves and their organizations, their societies through this huge transition. And I want to bring it back and apply it to now, because I think we're at one of those inflection points right now.
Mm.
Right now, there are so many things blowing up in our world,
Yes.
from fascism to war to power struggles that are coming up, and let alone the technology transformations we have with generative AI. These are all, and climate change, on top of that. So we are at a point where incremental change is not going to get us to where we need to be. We're
Yes.
going to have to be disruptive. We're going to have to get very uncomfortable to make the
Yeah.
kind of world we want to be in.
Yes. I love that. You're an author, multiple books. Maybe that's the next book, the lessons that history teaches us around disruption and transformation. Charlene, thank you so much for giving us the time today, being so generous with your time and your wisdom and sharing it with us. For anyone that's watching this, I want to thank you as well for watching it all the way through, although I know that hasn't been hard because it's so interesting. But I think the challenge is there for all of us actually to contemplate the role we play and how we can play a higher level role, be better stewards of the things that we're responsible for, be unlockers of potential, and see disruption as a muscle to develop and flex as a way of creating transformations that really actually matter in the world. So Charlene, thank you so much for your time, and I just so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I've learned so much from this conversation too.
Pleasure.